Hello and welcome. In part 1 of the Ailsa, we looked at how it was conceived and how it differed from all other modern buses at the time. We also learnt how Ailsa trucks started and how Volvo took over Ailsa trucks. In this part 2, we look at the production of the Volvo Ailsa, including the UK models and the export models. Now, as I touched upon in part 1, the Volvo Ailsa was fitted with the self-changing gears gearbox, which led it to have the Leyland National / Titan Olympian gear selector. And sometimes it is quite strange when you look around the cab of a vehicle and you spot bits and pieces that come from other makes or other part bins and such, and I might do a video on that in its own right. But the cab of the Volvo Ailsa, considering the engine was at the front, seems surprisingly spacious, although the proximity to the engine would cause problems with heat dissipating into the cab, as we will find out later on. Entry to the cab was via a cab door on the offside of the vehicle, a bit like a traditional half-cab bus. This is the interior of an Alexander-bodied Ailsa, which was built for West Midlands travel, and the lower saloon compares favourably with that of the later Volvo City bus. And indeed a standard rear engine bus, to be fair, like a Fleetline or an Atlantean. The stairs were of a one-piece fiberglass moulding, as was quite common on Alexander bodies at the time, but look at the placement of the periscope to view the upper deck. And as I mentioned in part 1 of the Volvo Ailsa video, the stairs came straight up onto a platform which formed the front part of the upper deck, normally where you'd have a couple of seats over the top of the driver's cab, and this was due to weight distribution. And here is that front upper deck. Now, it's very reminiscent of a Bristol VR, isn't it, with those 3 individual seats there, but there is no seat on the right, no front long bench seat. That is where the top of the stairs is, and there's like a little gangway where they come round and walk past those seats, and it's all to do with not having as much weight on that front axle as a conventional bus due to the weight of the engine being there. The first bus, THS 273M, was built in March 1974 and could be very much regarded as a prototype vehicle. A run of 10 pre-production vehicles followed this, the first being TOE 527N, which was delivered in September 1974. West Midlands PTE would go on to order a further 50 of the Volvo B55 Ailsas, all with the same Alexander bodywork. Now, you might think that 50 is quite a large fleet, but compared with the thousands of fleet lines that they were running at the time and later metro buses, it actually wasn't that many, and they did start to stand out as unstandard vehicles, so they were sold off, and we will find out later on what happened to them. Another early customer for the Ailsa was Greater Glasgow PTE, which later became Strathclyde PTE. Some of their buses were fitted with the Alexander bodywork, which featured the panoramic windows which matched their Atlantean fleet at the time. The Ailsa would feature quite predominantly in the Greater Glasgow and later Strathclyde fleets, especially after the introduction of the Mark III Volvo Ailsa. Now, a quick word on the difference between the Mark I, the Mark II and the Mark III. The Mark I was fitted with the self-changing gears semi-automatic gearbox, while the Mark II had the option for a Voith automatic gearbox, which had an integrated retarder. There had been reliability issues with the original rear axle on the B55 Ailsa, and on the Mark III this was replaced by one from the Volvo truck range. At the same time, the Ailsa name was dropped, the model just becoming known as the B55. Many of the Mark III Volvo B55s for Strathclyde saw service right up into the first bus era, with their squarer Alexander RV bodywork rather than the original rounded AV bodywork. Moving to the English PTEs, Greater Manchester Transport took 2 for evaluation, and these were fitted with their standard Northern Counties bodywork. In 1984, Merseyside PTE took a baker's dozen of Volvo Ailsas. These were fitted with Alexander bodywork to the squarer RV type design. Probably the most striking bodywork on a Volvo Ailsa was that was delivered to South Yorkshire PTE, and these were bodied by Van Hool McArdle. This bodywork was built in Dublin in Ireland and had similarities to the CIE Atlanteans that were being built at the time, also with Van Hool McArdle bodywork. In fact, South Yorkshire actually took one Atlantean with this bodywork as well. And it just goes to show you how unique and how individual the South Yorkshire fleet was at that time. And a little while ago I did a video about South Yorkshire Transport ordering a batch of DMS lookalike fleet lines. Well, it just so happens that A1 Services of Ardrossan, apologies if I've mispronounced that, did a similar thing when they ordered 2 South Yorkshire lookalike Volvo Ailsas with the Van Hool McArdle bodywork tacked on the end of the South Yorkshire order. South Yorkshire ended up with 62 of the Van Hool bodied Ailsas, and only one of them made it into South Yorkshire Transport livery, the rest all being withdrawn around the time of deregulation, with several of them passing to Hampshire Bus down in obviously Hampshire, and eventually finding their way up to Stagecoach Magic Bus in Perth in Scotland. Tyne and Wear took 3 of the pre-production Ailsas with the almost standard Alexander bodywork, but they didn't have particularly long lives with the PTE, and all 3 were sold to an independent operator over in Leeds in Yorkshire, oddly enough called Independent. And talking of Yorkshire, West Yorkshire PTE took 1, and this was the last of the pre-production vehicles and had the chassis number 74010. The following Ailsa, which became KSF1N for Alexander Midland, had the chassis number 75011 and was the first of the true production buses. Now in 1975, Maidstone and District down in Kent took 5 of these Alexander-bodied Volvo B55 Ailsas as part of the National Bus Company's trial to evaluate new vehicles for the NBC. And if you would like me to do a video in the future about these National Bus Company trials, please comment down below and I shall see what I can do for you. The Ailsas were put up against some MCW Metropolitans, which also featured Swedish running gear in the form of Scania engines and chassis. The buses they were being compared against was the National Bus Company standard vehicle, the Bristol VR, which at that point had just been upgraded to the Series 3 Bristol VR. And some of these were engined with Leyland engines and some of them were engined with Gardner engines. And I think you can probably guess which one won the trial. Incidentally, during the long hot summer of 1976, the heat dissipating from the engine caused a strike at Maidstone and District as the cabs became too hot for the drivers to work in and they refused to drive the Ailsas. It's not surprising that in Scotland the Ailsa was quite a big hit, as many considered it to be pretty much a Scottish-built bus, especially when fitted with the Alexander bodywork. Alexander Fife built up quite a large fleet of them and had the first production vehicles after the pre-production run. Central, Western and Scottish omnibuses would go on to acquire Ailsas. And while we're talking about Scottish operators, we cannot not mention Tayside, who ended up with 161 examples which they ran on their Dundee city services. Now, something I did pick up was that Alan Westwell, who became Director of Public Transport at Tayside, had been involved with the development of the Ailsa with Volvo and Ailsa trucks. And apparently this stemmed from a deep distrust for British Leyland products. There we go again, there's that distrust, isn't there? And that dissatisfaction with British Leyland. And this probably explains why Tayside took so many of the Ailsas, where they became very much loved by the travelling public and the drivers as well. Tayside kept their Ailsas in service until 2000. Another well-known operator of Ailsas was Derby. Their main claim to fame being the original owner and operator of the only low-height Volvo B55 Ailsa built. Now, it's fair to say that this bus was a little bit of a mash-up, to be honest with you. The lower deck floor seemed rather cluttered compared to the standard height Volvo Ailsa. It also looks like the cab almost intrudes into the upper deck as well, a little bit like the Leyland and Albion Lowlanders, doesn't it? And maybe it's the fact that we're used to seeing the standard height Volvo Ailsas, but it does look a little bit squashed and compacted down. The bus, like many other Volvo Ailsas, later passed to Black Prince of Morley in Leeds. Derby also ran Northern Counties bodied Volvo Ailsas, as well as rather rare Marshall bodied Volvo Ailsas and some that were bought from Merseyside PTE. Another well-known operator of Ailsas was Cardiff Bus, who purchased 36 with Northern Counties bodywork between 1981 and 1984. Cardiff Bus ended up being the last significant operator of the type, with them being in service up until 2007. As part of its alternative vehicle evaluation trials, London Transport ordered 3 Volvo Ailsas. These were delivered in 1984 and were numbered V1 to V3. All were built with Alexander R-type bodywork, to a very non-London looking specification, if I do say so. V1 and V2 were pretty much standard looking Volvo Ailsas, but V3 was something a little bit different. This bus took full advantage of the Ailsa layout and had a rear platform with rear doors and a rear staircase, in addition to the more standard front door as well as a front staircase, so it had 2 staircases and 2 doors. It was fitted with a rear emergency exit in the middle of the lower deck, a bit like a Bristol low-decker. But it never seemed to really get much use this way, as apparently the second staircase caused a blind spot and the bus had to be operated with a conductor. It was later rebuilt to a more conventional standard with just the one door, but retained both of the staircases. Now, London Transport morphed into London Buses, and London Buses seem to certainly have a thing for the Volvo Ailsa. They had 13 of the striking Van Hall bodied ones from South Yorkshire PTE, and took the entire batch of 50 from West Midlands PTE. These were later joined on London Regional Transport tendered services by several examples being run by Borough Line of Maidstone. One thing I didn't realise until I did the research for this video, that when the Ailsa was drawn up, there were actually plans for it to be available as a single deck and a double deck chassis. Kind of reminds you a little bit of the Dominator and the Metrobus, doesn't it really? In the event, there was only one single decker Volvo Ailsa built from new, and that had this rather fetching looking Marshall Khmer bodywork on it. And the Marshall bodywork isn't known as one of the most good looking of bodyworks, I must admit, but this particular example, maybe it's the Strathclyde livery, does look rather nice. Strathclyde later converted an Ailsa to single decker after it had an argument with a low bridge, and this did seem to be a favourite trick of Strathclyde, as they did that similar conversion to 3 Atlanteans which were used on the interstation shuttle service, I believe. When it came to export, I must admit I was surprised at how few of them were actually built for going overseas. China Motor Bus received only 8 2-axle Volvo Ailsas, and there was only ever 3 3-axle Ailsas built for export. 2 of those going to China Motor Bus and another one going to Indonesia as demonstrators. Further demonstrators were exported to Singapore and Bangkok. The greatest overseas sales for the B55 Ailsa was to Indonesia, who took 320 buses between 1981 and 1985, and here they operated in really tough conditions with, it's fair to say, vague maintenance. An expression I saw which really does sum it up. It would make even the worst cowboy operator in the UK look like Lothian Regional Transport compared to these guys. In 1985, the last Volvo B55 was built for Indonesia, and had the chassis number 85040. Production then switched to the underfloor engined Volvo City Bus. There had been 1,049 Ailsas built in total, although the last ones weren't Ailsas, as I've said earlier, they were just B55s. Fortunately, there are around 30 Volvo Ailsas, or B55s, depending on your philosophy, in preservation. So next time you're at a running day or a bus rally and have the opportunity to ride on one of these fine vehicles, then do so, because it was a very brave move of Volvo to put the engine at the front in a rear engine bus world, isn't it? And it certainly proved to be quite beneficial for them. It certainly wasn't a failure, was it? Thank you so very much for watching part 2 of the Volvo Ailsa story. It's gone on a little bit longer than what I would have liked it to have done, but I'm sure you'll forgive me. If you did like this video, please like and share it. And don't forget to subscribe to my channel, hitting the notification bell to make sure that you don't miss my future releases. Thanks for your support. Bye for now.